When kids just won't listen, parents often feel stuck between two choices: to give in or get angry. It's exhausting. We give you the top techniques directly from the experts, helping you on your path to a more peaceful, respectful, and joyful life with your kids. It was such an honor to talk to our guest today, the author of the #1 bestseller, Would You Teach a Fish to Climb a Tree? A different take on kids with ADD, ADHD, OCD, and autism. She is none other than Anne Maxwell. Apart from being a #1 international best-selling author, Anne is a psychotherapist with over 25 years of experience working with children, families, and adults. She is trained as a licensed clinical social worker, a registered play therapist, supervisor, and also an Access Consciousness certified facilitator. In addition to her therapy practice, she travels across the country and around the world, facilitating workshops and speaking to groups of parents, school staff, and medical and mental health professionals to create awareness and change for kids, families, and adults. Anne and I had a good chat. We talked about the topics that we both love: kids and play. She told a few stories about how she has helped families manage kids' behavior, and we discussed a very important point: how to listen to kids through their behavior. So check it out. I think you'll really like it. And let's learn from Anne Maxwell. Anne Maxwell, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
So am I. I'm going to ask you my favorite first question. What is it that you love most about working with kids?
Oh, there's so many things, but what I love the most about working with kids is their willingness to let go of whatever it is that's keeping them stuck. And I mean, you can see that with toddlers, with babies, and moving on up the line. It's an ability that may fall by the wayside after a while, but with toddlers, when they run into something that frustrates them, they're so easily distracted, and it's just this sort of joyful willingness to love their lives and be enthusiastic, no matter who they are, no matter what's going on, no matter what their quote story is, no matter what their quote diagnosis is. Like that quick willingness to move on. I love it, and their playfulness.
Yeah,
I love their play.
Trying to think if there's a word for all that. Well, I think about resilience but it's more than that. It's more than
that. Mm-hmm. It's the joie de vivre. It's joy of living. It's like, woo, let's go. I had a huge play therapy practice and a big play therapy room where the walls were lined with toys. And one of the things that parents get really frustrated about is when kids, toddlers will open up something and dump it out, and then move on to the next thing and dump it out, and move on to the next thing and dump it out. Right. And they try to play with something and it doesn't work, and they come over and cry and scream, and then you either fix it or distract them with something else, and then they move on, like that. I love it. I just love that energy.
Is there, what would you say is the main thing that you've learned from working with them?
The main thing that I've learned from working with them is just basically to keep moving. Don't stay stuck, because they so often don't. And I've worked with kids who've been hideously abused and neglected, like just stories that would make you cry and send shivers down you, just like horrifying stuff. And when they're not labeled with "this is going to affect you for the rest of your life," or "that was a horrible thing," the way I approach kids is, okay, that's what's been going on for you up until now, but here you are, where do you want to go? Right? And just sort of open the door to them to like that they can have a different future. I mean, one of the underlying principles of my practice is that every choice you make creates a future, immediate, midterm, long term. And kids really get that. Like, if you don't have an opinion about what they should do or what the right thing is for them to do, I just view our job as parents, therapists, people who love kids, people who work with kids, to teach them to choose, right, basically. And which is a sort of a different approach from, this is the right way, you have to do this, and if you don't, this is going to happen. It's like, no. What's that choice going to create? Now, if you don't do your homework, what's going to happen when you go to school tomorrow? What's your dad going to say when he gets home? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of experience working with kids in a lot of different areas, including being a registered play therapist.
Yeah.
And now you're gallivanting around the world, doing workshops and with new audiences who are getting a hold of your book and asking for you to come give them some more wisdom. So when you're working with kids now, it's often in those type of environments where, at a conference or at a workshop, where you're able to create some type of space for children there. Am I getting that right?
Yes, I mean, I still do sessions with kids. I did one the other day, and my practice has evolved from the sort of pretty much 100% direct clinical practice that I had for years in a variety of settings: outpatient, inpatient, in home, day hospital, day treatment, like all of the. I've worked in all the settings, and my practice has evolved from that into a more. I don't even know how to put it. I work a lot with parents and groups and teachers and offer workshops on what, on kids, whatever it is, like parenting, different approaches for kids in school. So, for example, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine who lives in suburban Washington, D.C., asked me if I would come and talk to one of the schools that was in the area. It's a blue ribbon, upper middle class, pretty fancy suburban high school where they'd had 9 suicides in the last 2 years. And there was a health fair going on. And she asked me if I'd go, and I did. And I don't know, almost, there were 200 parents that showed up in the room who were really looking for ways to deal with it and what to say, what to do, and how to help their kids, and like that. So that's the kind of thing that I do.
Yeah. A little bit of everything, sounds like.
A little bit of everything, yeah.
Well, the title of this show being Getting Kids to Listen, I'm always looking for specifics. I think that a lot of our listeners are stressed out parents who are just trying to get through the evening, let's say, after their kids come home, and they know that things could be better if they could find a way to get that communication happening easier. So do you have any insights there, and could we create a scenario to try to diagnose or explain how to get that cooperation when times are tough?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing about not listening, one of the underlying premises of my practice has always been behavior is a form of communication.
Mm.
And so when parents come in and tell me that their kid isn't listening, my first question is, what's your child actually saying by not listening? And I'm not making the child right. I want you to hear that. I'm not bashing parents and idolizing kids. There's just a communication breakdown, like you said, that occurs. And kids need to be heard. And they also need to function. They also need to, contribute at home and do all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But so one example is a mom who had a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old who was the 5-year-old being in kindergarten for the first, or maybe he was 6 and in first grade. It was a full day program. And she would pick him up at the end of the day, and he really wouldn't listen to anything. He wouldn't fasten his seatbelt. He'd throw tantrums when she took him to stores to run errands, like that kind of stuff. And I asked her, she said, I don't know what to do with him because he's not listening, and he goes home and he throws all these tantrums and he won't do anything. And I said, so tell me about because I was wondering what it was that was making him function like that. And I said, so tell me about his day. How does that go? And she said, well, he's in school from X to Y. And then I pick him up and I, go to the grocery store and pick up the dry cleaners and run errands. And then we go home. But because he won't listen to me, it's making it really hard. And I asked her, what do you think he's saying to you? She said, well, he probably doesn't want to go on the errands and stuff like that, but I've got a lot of things to do, and I've got to pack it all in. It's just more convenient to do it this way. And I said, okay, how's it working? Right?
Yeah.
And she said, well, it's not. And I said, what can you jump into his shoes for a second? What's his day been like? And she got it. It's overstimulating, it's this and that, blah, blah, blah. And I said, and what does he actually require right now, when he gets picked up? And she said, I don't know. And I said, well, do you ever take a break? And she said, no. I said, okay. Is that what he's asking you for? I wonder what would happen if you did something that was soothing to him, that settled him down or whatever. And we just had that conversation, and she worked through it. She came up with another way for her to get all her errands run, and for him to get the break, the time out from the grind of being in school and behaving, and then being in the car and behaving, and going on the errands and behaving, and going home and behaving, and just and so she started picking him up from school and either taking him outside or to a swimming. They live in Hawaii. To go swimming, to whatever, and she said it changed everything. But the question that I always ask is, what are you not hearing? That if you were to hear it, what are you not hearing that they're saying to you that if you would hear it would change everything? And kids communicate in ways other than with their words. They communicate behaviorally. They communicate energetically. They communicate physically. What is it that he's saying without words that you're not hearing, that if you heard it would change everything? Does that help?
Absolutely. When you first asked that question, I imagine some folks are able to come up with an answer quickly. Does it ever happen that people say, well, how can I read his energy? It beats me. I don't know.
Well, and then I go to when he was a baby. Did you know the difference between I have a wet diaper cry and I'm hungry cry, and get this person's face out of my face cry? Right.
Right.
I want to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 99 out of 100 parents will say, yeah. Like you're tuned into your kid, right? Those times when you're in the house and all of a sudden everything goes quiet.
Right.
They're up to, right?
Yep.
It's like you read the cues. That may be another way of putting it. So what are the cues that tell you what's going on with your child? He's irritable. He's cranky. He's unhappy. He's not using words. He's getting physical. He's or curling up in a ball and just crying. Like, what are the cues that tell you that all is not right? There's something going on.
All
And
right.
then to not take it personally and just ask the question, all right, what is this? What do I know about this? But there are always cues. Always, always, always.
So the parent or adult in that situation, let's say they've identified, they've gotten to jump into the child's shoes, and they have some best guesses as to the what they're not hearing and what the cues are. What's next for them?
Well, parents have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
They can either change it, do something different, or not. There's just no right way. I mean, sometimes if you're in a grind and you're in a bind and there's not a lot of time, you just tough it out with a tantrum. Mm-hmm. But to the extent that you're able to change whatever the schedule is or change whatever the routine is, I think that's so much of what parenting is about, is having flexibility and being able to ride the waves. I've never been much of a behaviorist. I really don't believe that you can control kids into thinking and feeling and behaving the way you want them to just by sheer force. I've never been a proponent of that. And I'm also not a proponent of letting kids run wild and, running all over you and not listening and just being little jerks. I'm not a proponent of that. What I am a proponent of is teaching parents to read the cues, and also and teaching kids to read the cues from the parents. Right? There's another little guy whose dad was pretty mean, and he'd get punished a lot for a lot of things, and he tried to turn himself into a victim of his dad, and rather than doing that, what I wanted to do was to empower him so that he could maneuver around his dad's meanness and rigidity. And the way I did that was by asking, what do you know about your dad? And if you do that, what's your dad going to do? It doesn't make it right, but what's he going to do, right? To let him know that he actually did have a choice. He could either do whatever it was that was going to make his dad mad, or he could do something different.
So in that scenario, you're helping the child look at the different, their own, can they predict what's going to happen in their environment, and can they prepare themselves in different ways, and you're helping them kind of walk through that.
Right. So this little guy didn't make his bed in the morning, and his dad would just punish him just mercilessly when he got home from school if his bed wasn't made. And I said, it's just your choice, sweet. You know what your dad's going to do if you don't have the bed made. And he goes, yeah, but I just ran out of time this morning. And I said, yeah, so what were you doing? And he said, well, I was doing, this, that, and the other thing. Oh, I know. He got in trouble for being late getting in the car. Mm-hmm. And the reason he was late getting in the car was because he was making his bed. That's what he said. And I said, because he didn't want to get in trouble when he got home from school. And I said, so what was it that kept you from making your bed in time to get in the car on time? And he came up with a whole thing. But just to ask them the questions so that they can see that the choices that they make, like in this case, the choice to play beyond the time that he knew was available to him to play, what that choice created him scrambling at the last minute to make his bed and getting in the car, and his dad being livid because he was late, right? Choice creates. Not right, not wrong. I didn't make his dad right at all. But I didn't make the kid right either. It's like, hey, this is your life. Like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, taking the blame out of the situation,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at what we can do differently.
Yep.
I have a question. When you were talking about kind of that first step of, hey, what are you not hearing? What are the cues? I am wondering what that process entails. Is this something that takes people months and years, or is this something that you can hammer out in a workshop in 45 minutes? Well, that's my first question. And my second question is, how much of the problem does that solve in itself?
One of the things, okay, boom. So there are a couple of questions that I ask in workshops and a couple of sort of principles that we talk about, but one of them is to ask questions. And so a question is not a statement with a question mark at the end of it. A question is a question. So what do you want for dinner? As it turns out, actually is a statement with a question mark at the end of it. It's not a question, because it presupposes A, that they're hungry, B, that they're going to eat, and C, that it's going to be in the form of dinner. Are you hungry is a question. Do you have homework is a question. Why didn't you get your homework done? Or when are you going to get your homework done? Are statements with a question mark at the end of it. And those are the sources of a lot of explosions at home, right?
They're kind of loaded questions, or questions that presuppose a certain outcome.
Yeah, yeah. That you're pretending are questions that aren't, where you're just rubbing their nose in the fact that they're either not doing what you want them to do or should do what they don't want to do, right? And then the other thing, I don't know about you, but one of the things that I'm really aware of is when you change how you are in a situation like that mom with the two kids, with the one that was throwing tantrums all the time. I don't even know how to talk about it other than the energetic connection between the two of them became filled with conflict, right? They're just mad at each other all the time. Really mad, and blaming each other for his tantrums. He blamed her for, he was punishing her for not listening to him. And she was punishing him by making him do all this stuff that was really over the top for a little dude like that, who didn't, right? And when she recognized that she could approach that situation differently and not blame him and not blame herself, but ask the question, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can actually get my errands done sooner or in a different way. It changed everything, because the conflict was gone, the blaming was gone, the punishing was gone, the guilt was gone. It's like, oh, all right, let's try this. It's just an energetic shift, and that's actually what changes more than anything, right? When you give up the need to control, the need to force, the need to be right, the need to prove something, and when you give up that need and just ask a question like, all right, what is this, and what can I do with it? What's he saying that I'm not hearing? What do I actually know is going on that I'm not acknowledging? Or what is it that I don't want to look at? Right? When you ask those questions, it'll come to you. You'll get it, and there's no right or wrong answer. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and it sounds wonderful. It also sounds I think elusive. I can think of a lot of times in my life where that process, as well as I might know it, is just not. I just do not feel like that is in front of me or an option. I'm just too angry, or I'm too
Yeah.
really anger, or just
Yeah. Well, it involves the willingness to be like toddlers are. Just let go of it. And it doesn't make you wrong, and it doesn't make you right, and it doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make them right.
Right. I wonder if often, when we're around kids, maybe we feel like the stakes are higher. Maybe because they're watching us, and we think that that kind of gray area isn't a good model. Like we want them to think that we're right. We want to be right, and we want to. We see that as the qualities of a good parent or a good leader, and so maybe.
So is that actually true, that the qualities of a good parent and a good leader are being right all the time? Like, how do you do around people who need to be right all the time? Mm-hmm. Do you learn anything, or do you just end up fighting them?
Right.
Leaders, I just get that leaders are people who inspire and invite people to something greater, to be, be who they are, whatever. Mm-hmm. And quote, I think when I have a friend who does parenting workshops, who asks the question, are you willing to be a quote bad parent? Are you willing to break the rules? Right. I have another one with do we have time for another story?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so one of the things that I encourage parents to do is to ignore what the experts say if it's not working with their kid, and to ask themselves what actually works here. So mom and a dad, mom, stepdad, and 5-year-old came in to see me, and they had purple circles under their eyes. They were exhausted, and they were worn out. And I think it was the same pediatrician who referred. Maybe it was a different one. And the pediatrician, no, it was a different one, clearly, because this pediatrician told the mom, she said, he's not sleeping at night. And I said, okay. And she said, the pediatrician, and I said, how is that a problem? And she said, well, the pediatrician said, because he's 5 years old, he needs 10 to 11 hours of sleep at night. And I said, well, how much sleep does he actually need? And she said, the pediatrician said he needs 10 to 11 hours at night. And I said, okay, so can we set that aside and tell me a little bit about him? How long did he sleep as a baby? And she said he never slept more than a couple of hours. And I said, and so what goes on in your house at bedtime? And she said, these horrific fights that she said last night it got physical and we were pinning into the bed. Mm-hmm. And he was screaming and yelling, and it was awful, and it went on from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. We all just fell asleep, just exhausted. And she said, we can't live like that anymore. And I said, no. And I said, so tell me. She said, that's all. I said, how much sleep does he actually require? And she said, really, 5 or 6 hours is all he gets at night. And I said, in the daytime, is he tired? Does he need a nap? And she said, no. And I said, okay, how about if we come up with a plan for you guys so that you can have something different? And I asked them questions. They came up with a plan that was they would do bedtime, nighttime routine, and then they put him in charge of when he turned off the light. And there were several deals. One of them was the parents would provide him with quiet things that he could do in his room. And then when he was tired, he could turn off the light. And I said, it's not okay for him to be running around, screaming and yelling in the middle of the night. That's not okay. And I wonder if you put him in charge of when he turns off the light, if a lot of that will go away. And so they set up this plan where he had to stay in his room, and he got to turn off the light, and he got to, do all these fun things in his room. He just had to stay in there. And they came back a week later, and the dark circles were gone, and they were smiling, and this little guy was so grateful. He came out of the corner and sat next to me. And I said, so how'd it go? And the mom said, the worst thing that happened was one morning I woke up and there were tears all on the kitchen floor. But other than that, it was good. And it's like, yeah, like, what do you know? What do you know about your child that is different? If your child doesn't function within the norms of what the pediatricians or the teachers or the whoever's say they should perform, what if they're not wrong? What if they just require different handling, different approaches?
Right. Yeah, I think that pediatricians and all types of experts will write books about all the things that kids need. They need to be reading by the time they're 6, and they need math, and they need all the things that schools are giving them. And there's not a way to. I mean, you could say that they need more things than could possibly be provided in a day.
Right.
And I think, we deal with that as adults too. It's like, well, I need to exercise every day and I need to eat right every day. And then, wait a minute, there are not enough hours for everything sometimes.
Well, not enough hours. And is that actually true? Does your body want to work out every day?
Right.
Does your body have a different idea of what it would like to have,
Yeah.
There's just so many rules and regulations that people then try to adapt to that don't suit them, don't suit their kids, don't work for them. And then they make themselves wrong and their kids wrong and judge them mercilessly and judge themselves mercilessly. It's like, no. I mean, that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons that I do all these workshops is to just it's just to bring some relief from all that self-deprecation and self-judgment, and need to be a, quote, good parent, according to the experts, when it doesn't actually work for you and your kids.
It's an understandable position. I think that in medicine and parenting and all sorts of things, we're prone to be defensive, and it's kind of like, a doctor's going to prescribe something, because to not prescribe something is, well, you could have done more, and a parent is going to feel, compelled to create a certain environment so that they don't feel like they're being looked at or judged or judging themselves as, well, I didn't do my best, or I didn't try because I didn't send the kid off to all these different activities, schooling, whatever else might not be working for the kid. That's a new theory I'm working on, the defensive parenting theory.
Right. Well, and the main quality of the defensive parenting theory is the need to judge yourself and judge your kids. Right. All the ways that you can make yourself wrong. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. So you have plenty of resources for people to check out. We were just talking about your book, which was released around 2014. Would you like to tell us more about that, or are there other resources that you're more excited about now that you think people can check out?
There's lots to check out. I've written a couple of books, but this one is an international bestseller, and it's been translated into different languages, but it's called Would You Teach a Fish to Climb a Tree?
Would you teach a fish to climb a tree?
A different take on kids with ADD, ADHD, OCD, and autism. And it comes from the quote of Albert Einstein, which is, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. And welcome to the world of the kids with ADD, ADHD, OCD, and autism. They don't function like other kids do, and they're made to feel so wrong for being who they are, for learning the way they learn, for speaking the way they speak, for looking the way they look, like all that kind of stuff. And So the book is just an attempt to dissipate some of that and to open up different doors for different way of being with them, looking at them, dealing with them, and teaching them how to function out in the world in a way that's easier for them.
Does it include that kind of first basic step? Does it have more on this asking questions and assessing?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It does. Lots and lots of tools in there that you can use, that you can try out.
Yeah. That's something that sounds easy, but I can imagine being, really hard to approach, especially if somebody doesn't have an expert around to talk about that, or if they're only working out of a book, or if they aren't familiar with that process.
It's a muscle that you develop over time. I mean, it takes practice, and it just takes practice. That's all. Like all of them, everything takes practice, right?
Yeah, and I imagine that mindset of, kind of pausing and assessing the situation and asking the right questions is not
it's
just
not even the right question. It's just asking the question.
Asking questions.
Yeah.
That's useful outside of communicating with kids.
Yes, it is.
So worth
a lifesaver, personally.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
All right.
Cool.
And going forward, what's next for you? Are there events or anything you'd like to invite listeners to?
Actually, there is one. I'm also I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a registered play therapist supervisor, and so sometimes I do workshops for therapists, and so I've got one of those coming up. But in March, I'm going to be traveling around Europe, and I'm going to be doing a book launch of the book into German and hopefully French. Hopefully it'll be published by then. But there is one of the intros that I'm doing that will be live streamed, so you can participate in it from anywhere in the world. Okay. And what I can do is send you the link to that class. The workshop will be in English, and it will be simultaneously translated into Russian, into French, and probably German and possibly Dutch. I'm not quite sure yet what all the languages are, but you won't hear that unless a participant asks a question in that language, and then you'll hear the translation. So
that's cool.
Anyway, it's just a couple of hours, so I can send you the link.
Yeah, any links, we'll post everything that we've talked about, and anything else you have to send along, we'll.
Oh, and you can also, on my website, I'll make sure that Julie gets all this to you, but you can download a free audio of me reading one of the chapters in the book. I think it's chapter 1, either chapter 1 or chapter 2, but that's on my website too.
Great.
So, yeah.
Well, I feel like I could talk to you for hours. I know that we really haven't.
Great.
I know we haven't really scratched the surface, and we haven't even talked about things like access consciousness and other big areas of your work.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll have to have a part 2 someday.
There you go.
Is there anything that I've missed? Any parting thoughts you have before we say goodbye?
I can't think of anything. There's so much more to talk about, but I'm so grateful for you, James. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yep, me too.
All right. Well, I guess that's all. We'll put those links up, and thanks for everyone who's listening. We'll see you next time.